Let me ask you a question, and I don't want you to answer it quickly. I want you to sit with it. Have you ever been the barrier to someone else's success and didn't even realize it? Think about that. Not because you intended harm, not because you're a bad leader, but because something in the way you think, decide, or lead quietly closed the door for someone else. That's what we're talking about today: invisible barriers and the emotional intelligence to identify them. These are the ones that don't show up in policies, the ones that don't get reported to HR, the ones that don't get called out in meetings, but they are felt deeply by the people you lead. And here's the uncomfortable truth: if you're leading people, you have likely created one. But what are invisible barriers? Well, invisible barriers are not loud. They're subtle, patterned, and often disguised as normal. They sound like, oh, they're just not ready yet. Or, I go with people I trust. Or, well, they didn't speak up, so I assumed they weren't interested. But they look like this: the same people keep getting the stretch assignments, the same voices are being heard in meetings, and the same leadership style is being rewarded. But here's the reality: invisible barriers are often built from unexamined habits, not intentional exclusion. Think of it like this: simple enough for anyone to understand is that if leadership is a race, some people are running on a flat track while others are running uphill with weights on their ankles. You didn't put the weights there intentionally, but you don't stop and look. You'll keep rewarding the people on the flat ground. But let's talk about the data, because the data doesn't lie. So let's ground this in what we know. From the research I found, McKinsey and Company shows that diverse organizations outperform peers financially by up to 36%, yet representation gaps persist in leadership. A Harvard Business Review study found that leaders often overestimate their inclusiveness by 20 to 30% compared to how their teams actually experience them. And then, according to the Center for Talent Innovation, employees who feel they must, quote, cover aspects of their identity are less likely to innovate and more likely to disengage. So here's the connection: the invisible barriers really don't just hurt people, they really do quietly erode performance, innovation, and trust. That's the takeaway from those particular studies. Now, why is it that leaders don't see them? Now, I'm going to forewarn you because this is where it gets a little uncomfortable. But stay with me. Most leaders don't see the barriers they create because of three things. One is proximity bias. You trust and invest in people who feel familiar to you, not because they're better, but because they're comfortable. And this is something we all do, but we have to be aware of it. The other is privilege without awareness. Now, if you've ever had to question whether you belong, you may not notice when others are questioning it every day. So bear that in mind. Look around you, dial in to your diverse team, and pay attention. The other is having a lack of honest mirrors. In low diversity environments, leaders often don't have people who will challenge them, spaces where truth feels safe, or feedback that isn't filtered. That sense of an opportunity to gain really honest and open feedback does not really exist. The climate hasn't been created for that. So the belief becomes that if no one is complaining, everything must be fine. But the silence, you must know, is not agreement. Silence is often adaptation. So, how are you creating space for it not to be so silent, where you can receive feedback, that might actually encourage growth. Well, see, this is part of emotional intelligence because self awareness, self reflection, being courageous enough to ask the question is all part of emotional intelligence, especially as a leader. So here's the leadership shift. Let's anchor this in something critical. Managing is about tasks, it's very tactical and operational, but leading is about people, and that's actual leadership. You can manage work and still fail people. And if you're failing people, even unintentionally, you are creating barriers. So, what does it take to shift? Well, as I mentioned a moment ago, it's going to take radical self awareness. I want you to ask yourself these three questions. Who do I naturally advocate for? Who do I overlook without realizing it? Whose potential do I question more often? And if you really want to get somewhere with this, you must be honest with yourself. While this is radical self awareness, guess what else it is? It's radical honesty. Honesty with yourself. If your answers feel uncomfortable, then guess what? You're actually doing it right. The other is, as I also mentioned, intentional self reflection. Build a habit, not a moment of self reflection. At the end of each week, ask, who did I invest in this week? Who did I interrupt or dismiss? And who didn't get access that could have? Awareness without reflection does not create change. I'll say that one more time. Awareness without reflection does not create change. The last point here is compassion. Compassion in leadership, it is not softness. It is the ability to understand that people are navigating experiences you may never have had. And leadership requires you to care about that. Now, I also want you to create a truth telling environment. If you really want to make a shift, this is your tip. If no one can tell you the truth, you will never see your blind spots. So I want you to try this. Ask, what is something I do that makes it harder to succeed here? And then don't defend, just listen. Don't explain, just hear them and really receive the information. That is leadership maturity. Now, another point that I really want to speak to is about shifting from intent to impact. This is frequently a conversation in small leadership meetings or huddles, if you will, but small team settings where leader to leader, you may be talking about issues and you may say all day, throughout the day, or to that particular safe space of a team that whatever happened wasn't your intent. And that's usually the case. But I need you to flip it. You need to flip it to talking about and asking yourself, what was the impact? Most leaders judge themselves by intent. Well, I didn't mean to exclude, but your team experienced the impact of feeling excluded. So leadership accountability lives in the gap between those two. But here's three practices that you can start immediately. All right. The one is kind of like the who's missing check. So before decisions, ask who's not in the room that should be. And don't just ask yourself in your own mind, ask others who are around the table before all of you make a decision. Or if it's a decision that's unto you, ask a couple of colleagues around you and run that by them and ask them, who else should I be including in this decision making effort? And then I want you to take into account, for instance, the pattern audit. I want you to look at promotions, who's getting promoted, opportunities, who's getting the opportunities, and then recognition, who's being recognized. See if you don't recognize a pattern of the same individuals or the same types of individuals. And if patterns repeat, you know there's a barrier somewhere. And then there's the one to one truth question. So in your next one on one, I want you to ask, what's one thing I could do differently that would better support you? You all have heard me in previous podcasts put a question similar to this that you inquire about this with your team. Ask them in your one on ones, which hopefully you're conducting regularly. But then I want you to pause long enough to actually hear their answer. That is the really key important component. So here's the truth that most leaders don't want to face: you cannot lead people well if you are unwilling to examine yourself honestly. Invisible barriers don't make you a bad leader, but refusing to look for them, that will limit the kind of leader you become. And over time, it will actually limit your team, your culture, and your impact, the positive impact that you are actually trying to make and create. So the question really isn't, do I create invisible barriers? The better question is, am I courageous enough to find them and then committed enough to remove them? That's your question, and that's your challenge. Thank you for spending time with me on Leading Today. If this episode resonated with you, I encourage you to reflect on the questions that were discussed today. I'm Dr. Lisa Bagby, and if this episode challenged you even a little, then it is doing exactly what it was meant to do. Please share this with another leader who is really serious about their growth. And please, I ask you, follow and subscribe so that you don't miss future conversations that push how we think about leadership, because leadership isn't just about getting results. So join me next time as we continue exploring what leadership looks like in practice, not just in theory. Until then, lead well, lead intentionally, and keep leading today.